Well, as I mentioned
Yes.
before, the Chief of Police asked that Dr. Lori Fridell come out and speak to us today. And it was at his personal invitation that she did so. Dr. Lori Fridell is an associate professor of the Department of Criminology at the University of South Florida. Prior to joining the University of South Florida in August of 2005, she served for 6 years as the Director of Research at the Police Executive Research Forum, which we all know as PERF. Dr. Fridell has 20 years of experience conducting research on law enforcement and is a national expert on racial profiling. Her primary emphasis is on how law enforcement agencies can and should respond to both racially biased policing and the perceptions of its practice. She has written several books, articles, and chapters on this topic. She speaks nationally, trains command staff, and consults with agencies on the topic of racially biased policing. With funding from the United States Department of Justice and experts from across the nation, she is developing model training programs on this important topic for 1, academy recruits, and 2, first-line supervisors. Dr. Fridell has testified before a committee of the Senate Judiciary Committee on the topic of racial profiling. She completed her bachelor's degree in psychology at Linfield College in McMinnville, Oregon, and both her master's and PhD in social ecology at the University of California at Irvine. Dr. Fridell.
Thank you, and welcome, Dr. Fridell. Welcome back, and I've seen you in action before, both here and at the PERF conference.
Thank you, Commissioner Mack, and good morning, Commissioners. It's really a pleasure for me to be with you here today. You've raised a very important issue regarding the 0 sustained complaints in the realm of racial profiling, and I want to speak to you today about this finding in 2 contexts. One, I want to look at the LA dispositions of racial profiling complaints in the national context. And then I also want to look at the role of complaint review in the context of comprehensive efforts on the part of agencies to produce what I call fair and impartial policing. My key messages are 2. One, there are very great limitations to complaint investigations in the realm of racial profiling. And as a result, agencies should not place too much emphasis on that particular mechanism in their broader efforts to promote fair and impartial policing. So as a preview, I want to look at the LA 0 sustained complaints finding in the national context. I want to talk a little bit about why the common experience is 0 sustained complaints. I want to talk about how we might maximize the complaint review function. But my most important message, I think, is putting the complaint review process in a context of larger efforts on the part of agencies to promote fair and impartial policing. So first, with regard to 0 sustained complaints, and this is, again, not an LA issue, this is a national experience. And I'd had some sense of this, but in anticipation of coming to see you, I made some calls to agencies, and I called complaint review entities, both sworn and civilian, as Chief Tifank had. I called 14 agencies and found that 4 of them did not have the racial profiling complaint category, but all of the others who did, 0 sustained complaints. So this is also consistent with what Commander Webb has found, what Chief Tifank has found in their inquiries around the nation. Why is 0 sustained complaints the common experience? And let me start here by saying I believe racially biased policing occurs. I think racial bias occurs in all professions that hire humans, and so there's no reason to believe that policing is immune from this. But it's important we make that distinction. Just to say that racially biased policing exists doesn't mean we can always see it when it's happening or even know when it's not happening. And while the complaint review process is a critically important accountability mechanism, I would allege that it is not at its best. It doesn't achieve its full strength in this arena of racial profiling complaints. Short of some kind of verbal evidence, whether the officer after the fact says that he misused race or something said at the scene that articulates what's going on in his or her head, it is very difficult to prove these complaints. They're qualitatively different from other types of allegations that become before the complaint review process. To think about this, we need to think about what racially biased policing is. It is the inappropriate use of race, ethnicity, color, nationality to make a law enforcement decision. So first of all, a law enforcement decision is made up of multiple factors, and what we're asking then is, was race a part of this constellation of factors, and was it inappropriate? And that decision might be a decision to stop, a decision to search, a decision to be rude. All of that would be encompassed. That makes racial profiling complaints different. We're not looking at objective behavior. We're trying to get inside the heads, as has been said this morning, to figure out why that behavior occurred. And in fact, let me give some examples to show some of the challenges. I'm going to give two examples, two hypotheticals of what I think is racially biased policing, and then look at the challenges that might be facing an investigator. One, in my hypothetical, we have an officer who's patrolling a white middle-class area and sees three African-American males, young African-American males, in a car. And he decides this is not consistent, this is not appropriate, and waits for what can only be 2 minutes before he finds a traffic violation. Sees these gentlemen roll through a stop sign and makes the stop. Because I'm all-knowing as the hypothetical developer, I will tell you that he stopped these folks not because there's any be on the lookout, not because of anything he knows about problems in the area, but because these are black males in a white area, and he wouldn't have pulled over a white woman in a professional suit. That, to me, is racially biased policing. Another example, the officer decides to give the Hispanic a citation as opposed to a warning because that person is Hispanic. These are racially biased policing, but think about the quandary of the investigator. They can interview everybody twice. They can canvass the neighborhood for witnesses. They can take pictures and develop high-tech replications and never get to what was motivating those officers in those two examples. So these do exist, but to have racially biased policing exist doesn't mean that we have objective proof at the level of preponderance of evidence, and this is what we find agencies are facing across the nation. Even though I had this understanding of how difficult it is to see racially biased policing even when it occurs, I asked this question when I made my calls to the various complaint review entities. And I asked them this: what, if anything, is challenging about investigating racial profiling complaints? And I have some quotes here, both from sworn personnel reviewing complaints and civilian oversight personnel. One sworn personnel, very succinctly, how do you read someone's mind? Another sworn personnel, profiling is intent-based. Unless the officer confesses, it is almost impossible to prove. Often the complainant cannot point to any specific evidence of racial bias. It's a feeling, they believe it. From the civilian oversight, 3 quotes. 1, bias is more subtle. That doesn't mean it's not there, but it's near impossible to determine when race is an inappropriate motivator in an incident. How are we to get inside the head of the officer? It would be very easy for an officer to come up with a legitimate reason. It is very hard to get evidence of misuse of race to make a decision. And finally, the challenge is getting into the officer's head. The officer can come up with a reason other than race. Maybe he's lying. Maybe he's not. Maybe the citizen is right. Maybe he or she is not. For the citizen, it's a feeling. Maybe it's based on past experiences. Sometimes they are just wrong, and when they are right, often there's no objective proof. So the sum is that the LA experience of zero sustained complaints is the national norm, and we can actually look at the nature of these allegations and understand why that is the case. Because of this, my major recommendation is that we not put all of our eggs into the complaint review basket, but think more broadly about how agencies can promote fair and impartial policing. But before I do that, I want to talk about how we might maximize the complaint review process. I had to think about this in the context, as Commander Webb said, he asked me to speak to his IA investigators this afternoon. And so I had to think about what is my message to IA investigators in light of what we know about racially biased policing. On the one hand, I need to acknowledge their challenges. On the other hand, I need to promote their maximum efforts. Now, what I think is the key to progress on this issue, whether we're talking about internal affairs and LAPD as a whole, or the profession. And that is, I think we need to think more accurately about what racially biased policing is